And hello, everybody. Welcome to a Thursday night edition of Narrative Live. It's good to be with you tonight. We have a big show. We have a really big show. Lots to cover tonight. Hello, Eric Garland. How are you?
Hello, Zeb Shalev.
It's nice to see your face today. You seem in a pretty good mood. Is there a reason why you're so chipper today?
I just love the smell of federal indictments in the morning. What can I tell you?
And there were some interesting ones that came down today, and we're going to go through
Oh,
them.
yeah.
Especially in your backyard, your backyard of St. Louis over there. So that's going to be
Oh.
really interesting to talk about. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. Plus, you know, the Queen is having her Platinum Jubilee, which means she's been around for a long time. 70 years, probably too long for anybody, but there you go. There she was, 70 years as the reigning monarch. We'll explain what it means that she's leaving, if she's leaving, when she's leaving, because she almost certainly is leaving. But as this is probably the start of her very, very long goodbye, you know, what happens next? What happens when King Charles steps onto the throne there, and what are the implications for the rest of the world? There's lots to talk about there, and there's interesting ties. You know, I finally found the ties between that family, that royal family, and the Russian royal family, the Romanovs, and
Yes.
and we should talk about that. But you're not going to give it away yet, later. And also, she's finally gone. Let's talk about a long goodbye. You know, it was certainly a long time for Sheryl Sandberg at Facebook. We have all heard stories about Sheryl Sandberg, some of it of her own making, and many of those are completely manufactured. And then some of us who've dug a little further have discovered some other things about Sheryl Sandberg that are worthy of your knowledge. And we are going to talk a little bit about her origin story. How exactly did she become the COO of Facebook? And what exactly did she do there as the social media guru at Facebook? We have lots to talk about there, lots and lots and lots. And it all goes back to Harvard. You all remember the Winklevoss twins and that movie, The Social Network? Well, that's the story we're going to retell a little bit with a new look at how Sheryl Sandberg got to be the COO of Facebook. So that's all in the next hour. We'll see if we can pull that off. If you're watching on our interactive player, and if you're a patron, you can go to narrative.org/TV. That's narrative.org/TV. There's an interactive player which allows you to comment to us directly on anything we're talking about, whether you want to tell us that we're talking crap or you want to agree with us or just comment on any of the topics on the show. Patrons get exclusive access at narrative.org/TV. We'll also be monitoring the chats on YouTube. And so let's begin. Let's begin with your big story out of St. Louis, because tell everyone why you're so interested in corruption, particularly in your backyard there.
Because it slaps you in the face every morning when you wake up. It's, you know, bottom line, this is an incredibly corrupt place. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of different places that have organized crime and sort of, you know, an audacious, even arrogant elite that is pretty sure it can buy its way out of whatever. But I think there are very few places where the corruption is so very entrenched and sure of itself as St. Louis, Missouri. Been living here 12 years and, you know, have witnessed some, you know, I've been, you know, we all have to navigate the corruption, whether it's, you know, paying taxes, buying a house, anything with courts, the police. You may have seen Ferguson. You know, it's just kind of ambient here. But it's breaking. There's some things breaking through, and they always help. And those are federal indictments. Now, we've had a couple in the past, like the county executive would be essentially the mayor here. A guy named Steve Stenger went down for bribery and honest services fraud, but it was a kind of limited prosecution. The verbatims in the charging documents were hilarious, in the sense that, you know, he's bragging about handing out patronage jobs because he wanted to kiss up to a local billionaire named Rex Sinkerfield.
Rex Singerfield? There's a villain called Rex Singerfield in the story?
I didn't say villain.
I said villain. But it's just because
it's a pretty good villain name.
It's a pretty good villain name. I'm going to write that down and put it in a book sometime in the future, because that's a great name.
It's funny because Rex is going to play into this story here. Now, he's not on the indictments or mentioned the way he is in the Stenger indictments from 2019. But he came back. He's from here originally, went out, formed Dimensional Partners, I think it is, you know, one of the oldest and most successful hedge funds, ran out of California, moved back here in 2006 and just started buying up the political class, you know, starting nonprofits and, you know, backing all these candidates overtly and covertly. In the Stenger indictments of 2019, we found out that he had run a a bunch of his donations to this guy Stenger through the Carpenters Union, which is a straw donor scheme and is illegal.
Hmm.
So the Carpenters Union, one of the presidents, I forget if it's from that local or if it's the whole shooting match, Laufenberg in New York, New Jersey, he just this morning with the Carpenters Union switched his plea in federal court because he's indicted. He switched his plea from not guilty to guilty this morning. The Carpenters Union in St. Louis, about September of last year, disappeared entirely. They shut it down. All the people that were members of the Carpenters Union became part of the local in Chicago. Basically, the organization's gone. There are reports that some very influential people were in tears when that happened because they feared the ramifications of it. And I think we're about to find out why.
So let me see if I've got it right. So you've got the Carpenters Union. They're basically donating funds into a politician's, campaign that is really from a billionaire. Is that what you're saying?
Billionaire Rick Sinkfield. That's right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And that's all well known. Why wasn't he indicted quickly for that? I mean, and because it was in the federal charging documents, it's like, if you saw in a federal charging document that somebody intentionally set fire to a place, you go, hey, that's arson. Right. How come no one's picked that guy up? But these things are complicated, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so now the Carpenters Union head has flipped and is now saying he's guilty and no longer not guilty. So that's an indication.
That's right. So
maybe he's cooperating.
That was this morning, okay. And then there was a notice that went out that there was going to be a hearing of public interest happening at the Eagleton Federal Building downtown St. Louis, and it was to announce the indictment of 3 individuals here: John Collins Muhammad, Jeffrey Boyd, and Lewis Reed. Lewis Reed is the president of the Board of Aldermen of the city of St. Louis. So there's different governments between the city and the county. So it's about 300,000-ish in the city, 1 million in the county. They work together, but they have separate governments. And this is a bribery scandal, and it's it's just really amazing. And it's a federal matter. If you check the first little paragraph there talking about, any government that takes $10,000 worth of assistance from the feds falls under federal jurisdiction if there's any corruption going on in it. So think about how much funding goes out in general, but how many different governments maybe that never would have taken quite that much federal assistance, like smaller towns or places that people go to commit crimes in because there's not a lot of accountability. That COVID aid may have pushed them over the limit to where they're now in federal crosshairs if they happen to be harboring public corruption. So that's just very interesting.
It is interesting.
I haven't even made it all the way through this thread yet. I have to stop for Gatorade and to take a break and carpal tunnel because there's just so much good stuff. But here, this ties these 3 individuals all are on the St. Louis Board of Aldermen. They get to make a bunch of the policy decisions, especially around economic development and construction. And the basic deal here is they were taking a whole slew of cash bribes they were selling tax abatement. There are programs where you don't have to pay taxes on your construction project or dramatically reduces them. And basically, if you hand them bags with $10,000 in it, they will get you one of these. And
so classic sort of construction corruption, if I could say that quickly.
Classic construction corruption. Yeah. And, we'd had a little construction corruption, indictment here a few weeks ago, a guy named Brian Cowart Sr., who was a COO of a major, very old line construction company here. He got federal charges for wire fraud of doing, there are a bunch of shell companies that are owned by people of color, and those are at the fronts for to add up to a certain number of minority business entity, MBEs they call it, so that you can you qualify for to win the bid on construction. Apparently, this construction firm had a series of LLCs that it was just a pass through. It was a fraud. These weren't really minority owned businesses. They got a cut, and it was really just going to the regular old
So we are seeing this everywhere. I mean, what you point out about St. Louis is that it's almost like it's a very typical kind of red state where there has been a lot of institutional corruption for a very long time.
This is a blue city.
Blue city.
Don't fall into that trap.
Okay.
These are all Democrats here.
Okay, these are Democrats. That's fine. It doesn't matter which, but it's a red state, isn't it?
The electorate has voted more for the Republican Party, and they dump a whole lot of propaganda in here. So yeah, it's more, this used to be a very classic swing state,
Right.
where whoever Missouri voted for, that's who won the presidency. And that departed in around 2004, I think. And it's only gotten more intense.
Yeah, because we point out on the show all the time, corruption is not just a one-party thing. It belongs to both parties. It belongs to politics in general. You'll find it everywhere.
Sure.
But the idea here, I guess, is I'm saying this is quite typical of what's happening in some of those red states. Maybe it's happening in every state, but it feels like this is more endemic in some red states, where you're seeing some of this kind of institutionalized long-term corruption.
Well, I got to push back on you because remember,
push back. That's what you're here for.
Illinois, my man, Illinois is a blue state.
That's
run by Democrats, and 4 of the last 5 governors of Illinois have gone to prison.
Good point.
Like the typical career path of an Illinois governor is penitentiary.
Right.
That's unlike any other state. That's
right.
Blagojevich was one of many to go to prison in our lifetimes.
I will withdraw my statement then, because you're absolutely right. Let's finish up here. What else do we need to know about this particular corruption scheme and how it you really took money out of the pockets of your residents in Missouri?
Well, I mean, it's cheating the rest of the, it's cheating people out of a tax base. Is like these politicians, they put cash in their pocket, and then the city doesn't get the tax base because they've given a fraudulent tax abatement. So that's why it's crime. There's a couple of things that are interesting here. One is the guy who appears to have been the John Doe who handed out all the bribes is a guy named Mohammed Al-Mutan. Now, I already knew his name because
is he here on these slides? I see him anywhere here. Or is this, I see this. This obviously has. Just tell me where to go on this, up or down on the.
It's some. I think it's down. Actually, where you get to me in the all caps yelling. So scroll down until it's in all caps, like because I haven't done this in a while. Because there's been a lot of serious stuff to talk about. But this is like just so hilarious to me because
oh wow, this is a great thread. People have to like really spend time. I see you here in all caps.
There we go. This guy Mohammed Al-Mutan, this was part of a cigarette arbitrage, drug dealing, and money laundering conspiracy charge that was started in 2017. That was filed in 2017, and he was out on. They hadn't gone to trial. He was out on his own recognizance apparently, and was continuing to operate businesses in the St. Louis area and bribe officials who, as late as 2020, 2021, were taking giant bags of cash from a guy who was awaiting sentencing from the U.S. Attorney's Office, from the judge, from the feds were all over him. It's like, guys, this is a man who wants to cut his sentence down. And if he's wearing a wire to put you in prison, he doesn't spend as much time in prison.
Wow.
And this is not a secret. The guy's he's the top one, and his alias, Abu Ali. Look, this is supposed to be okay. We talk about red state, blue state. This is all supposed to be a really racist place too, right?
Yep.
Well, then who's doing business with a guy named Abu Ali? Real name Mohammed Al-Mutan, and everybody on there, a bunch of Arabs, and they were buying cigarettes in states where it's cheaper. Because of the taxes, and then they were selling them in places they were selling them on the street in places where there's higher taxes. That's frequently, by the way, terrorist financing, and Hezbollah was busted for doing that in around this part of the world. So I don't know. This could be a Hezbollah cell, but this Al-Mutan character seems to have done a great service because he was clearly wearing a wire. And going around and being very specific about, so how much should we bribe your friend? Oh, I think 10,000 will be great. Oh, so I should bribe him $10,000 so he does what I want. Yes, and everyone is so, when you read the verbatims, everybody here in St. Louis is just, so yeah, of course you just bribe people and
So it's like Africa, basically. It's like Africa or Eastern Europe.
They'd be like, send me a card deck, 5 bananas. I mean, I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
This is, it doesn't matter what it's like.
It is what it is. And it's right there in St. Louis.
But this Lewis Reed character, who is still current, he didn't resign by press time tonight. But he's the president of the board of aldermen there, and he's been key to some things. I believe he was working with Rex Sinquefield around the privatization of the airport, which would have, I think, started flights to Beijing like daily. It kind of looked like it was going to be a human trafficking hub, is basically what was up. And there's corruption allegations about how the airport privatization was going, because they canceled it all of a sudden. And they also stopped an effort to merge city and county, where this guy, Steve Stenger, would have been the unelected metro mayor for 5 years without an election.
Oh, wow.
Post 2016. I mean, there's some weird stuff
here. The dictator of all St. Louis.
Well, yeah. Well, so here's where this goes. We've pierced in this city. We have pierced through the concept that, oh no, if you're on the in with the powerful people, you're going to avoid consequences. And that's why they're just like, oh yeah, 10 grand, 5 grand here. Should I bring extra money for your friend to bribe him? Yes, absolutely. Bribe. I mean, it's just how it works. And which leads to some other implications you might think of, like, well, so they're not afraid of any prosecutor hearing about it. One would imagine they're not afraid of a judge hearing about it. Is that because they're taking envelopes at the same time? Why is that?
That would be my guess. That would be my guess, right? Wouldn't that be your guess? That must be. If no one's scared of any enforcement, then everybody must be in on it.
I mean, Steve Stenger, who went down for corruption and bribery, he was supported by a lot of the different law and order types in town. So, but he was gone for a couple of years, and then he's back. Obviously, you look at the dates of these things. They decided, okay, give us a cash, but no, then write the checks to my political action committee, and I'll get it that way. It's in the verbatims there, which is interesting. You look at the date that happened was like June of 2020. I know, because I'm riding Pacer all the time here. Another alderman by the name of Larry Arnowitz, who passed away before he was tried and sentenced. He was indicted for mail fraud for paying himself cash out of his campaign account, which is legal. Mm-hmm. So there had actually been federal charges against a politician here for screwing around with this campaign account 12 weeks before these guys are like, oh, just take the bag of cash at the grocery store and then put it into the checks, send it to me, and we're all good. And 12 weeks later, like, they think the FBI and the the U.S. Attorney's Office are like the tooth fairy, like something you heard about, maybe you believed in at one point, but no, it doesn't.
Maybe that's the old FBI. Life. It seems like the new FBI and the new Department of Justice are quite busy. I mean, we just heard before the break before we started the show, that Peter Navarro was talking to Ari Melber in a kind of a hilarious interview, but interestingly enough, he basically confirms there's a grand jury impaneled to investigate January the 6th in the DOJ, because he's been called for that. So, it seems that there might be a grand jury investigating Jan 6th, which might include President of the United States of America. I mean, that seems to be what's going on. So, if anyone thinks that this is some sort of sweetheart DOJ run by some sold out attorney general, you are wrong. You're wrong. This is going to.
Oh, you mean we shouldn't fire Merrick Garland because he didn't put our favorite bad guy in handcuffs?
No, well, not yet. He hasn't done it yet.
Well,
but we should have to fire him.
Well, look, I mean, on the local, all politics is local. Yeah. For me, if you put Donald Trump is a problem.
Yeah.
But I'd much rather that you put the guys around here in prison, just so their buddies here think twice before defrauding me and my neighbors.
Right. But it's also
So
it's all like a cancer. You know, corruption is a cancer. It comes into your politics. It comes into your government, and it starts pretty small, and it doesn't seem to affect that many people. And you sort of everyone shrugs their shoulder. But as we've seen in America and elsewhere, it has a way of corrupting everything, and it gets ultimately it corrupts the entire system, and that's what we're seeing. So you know,
Agreed.
no matter whether it's small or on a federal level or wherever it is, it's got to be stopped, and it's got to be a kind of a you can't have any room for it at all. You've got to be completely have a zero tolerance policy around corruption in everywhere, in every level of government, no matter where it is, because it just keeps catching on. You know,
Yep.
Cut it out, cut out the corruption.
Is it illegal? Go to prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Follow the law.
I think just, but the 10,000 foot view here, 100,000 foot view, and then we move on. If you look at when the Russian mafia climbed into the United States in the 90s, really in the 80s, Refusenik period, which may come up in one of our other stories here.
Right.
You got a bunch of Russians that go to New York and end up rolling La Cosa Nostra there and just changing how it works. And Russia becomes a state that is run by the mafia itself, which had never really happened on a grand scale like that. And, perhaps if you go back to the prosecutions of like 80s and early 90s, there was a lot of taken down, organized crime, even in places like St. Louis. But it's been like 30 years where maybe a lot of the mob stuff had a big counterintelligence angle, and then a lot of money, which leads to potential corruption. And then people get away with more, partially because maybe people are bought off who are supposed to be watching them, or there's a counterintelligence angle. We have to know what they're up to, but then it's like sepsis. It's like the bacteria grows and almost kills the host. But you get 30 years of slowing down on prosecuting these kinds of crimes, and it creates this culture where, well, shit, if nobody's gone down for this kind of thing in 25 years, I'm good. Yeah. Until the point that you're not.
It takes away all institutional memory. Yeah.
Well, and now these people are, we have people here in St. Louis who are willing to do bribery deals with people who are under federal indictment for an 86 count indictment involving drug trafficking. They're like, sure, I'll take the money. Well, great. I'm glad you're that stupid. It's going to make this a lot easier. So.
Justice Day is coming for you. When we come back after the break, we're going to talk about the Queen. We're going to talk about Sheryl Sandberg. That's after this. They announced the first hearing, by the way. It's going to be in prime time on January the 8th, or June 8th, sorry, I believe.
June 8th. That's 8th. Wednesday coming up.
Yes, I believe so. Next June. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think that's right. I hope I'm right. People had better check me on that. But it's at 9 p.m. at night. Let me actually Google this properly so I don't mislead you. We're going to be live, obviously, for the big hearing. Because it's in prime time, you can bet your bottom dollar it's going to be a good one, because there's only 2 prime time events they're scheduling, and this is one of them. So we're hearing a tremendous amount of sell on this. So it's next Thursday. I'm sorry, at 8 p.m. next Thursday. 8 p.m. next Thursday. We'll be here.
Just 1 week? No problem.
We'll be right here next week, and it'll be an hour later than we normally do the show, but we might even start a little earlier to give everyone a preview of what's coming up, because there's a lot of evidence here suggesting that all 3 levels of government were involved in Jan 6, which is really something that no one has ever contemplated before, and everyone could ever imagined, that you would corrupt the entire thing, that you corrupt, every branch. But they did. They tried to, at least, and that's how they thought they were going to take over the entire country. Of course, that didn't work out the way they thought it would. So the Queen is celebrating her Platinum Jubilee. It means she's been on the throne for 70 years. It's a very long time for any monarch. I mean, think about it. Basically, her father died just after the Second World War, and she was 27 at the time, and boom, you're now the monarch. So you've got, basically everything that happened after the Second World War involving Britain, and her empire involved her. people think that the Queen is not powerful for some reason. I mean, they think that just because they have declared themselves ceremonial or whatever it is, that they don't exert any power, and that's complete bullshit. I mean, there's no ways you have centuries and centuries and centuries of power accumulate in one strain of family, and then decide that, in the last 100 years we're just going to throw it all away. I mean, it's just not.
Just on her amount of cash alone that the lady's got.
Yeah.
I mean, like, come on, folks. She's powerful. She could move markets.
Yeah.
And probably has.
And she's immune from prosecution. I mean, she can commit crimes and no one will stop her. Like, she's the one person who can commit crimes and no one will stop her. So it's not just that she's got a lot of power. She's got complete impunity. She can do whatever she wants, So, and she does maybe do whatever she wants. Maybe she does it because she thinks it's for the good of her empire. I don't know. But it seems to me that, there's a little criming going on as well.
Well, because of the Anglican Church, she's one of the few remaining theocratic monarchs. That the official story on her is that she is anointed by God. It's like Britain, the Queen, God.
Yeah,
and most everybody else has gotten. Hey, look, if God, is your direct, if you're a direct report to God, I mean, that's powerful.
Very, very powerful. And look, I'm not taking anything away from her. She's been a tremendous monarch. I mean, as far as monarchs go, I think she's been very effective at what she's done, and she's been generally well liked. People do like her. She's very popular amongst her people, and she's done a lot. And look at her. Look how happy she was today as she was, spending millions and millions of her taxpayers' dollars to celebrate her 70th year on the throne. They're otherwise interesting family, which have all been through all sorts of scandal. These are the remaining family members she can actually appear with in public. Some of them because of scandal, some of them for other reasons. But these are the new slimmed down, as they say, monarchy. And they're mostly a reasonably popular bunch, except for the guy to her right. That's Prince Charles, who's going to be the heir to the throne. Camilla, who is Charles's wife, is much more popular than she used to be, partly because Charles is really not that popular, because he's not really a very good guy. He's King Charles, the future King Charles. Turns out to be, for one thing, really good friends with Donald Trump, for another thing, quite racist, for a third thing, quite racist. Plus, he also, fourth thing, quite racist. But also, amongst other things, also interferes in the running of the government, which you're not, as a monarch, supposed to do. But as we point out, they have power, so they do this kind of stuff. They can write letters to the minister of whatever, and they get what they want. Sometimes he even sells passports, or, accepts bribes from the king of, the UAE, or the king of Saudi Arabia, or, the only other person I've seen actually do that dance with that sword, other than Donald Trump, with the Saudi king, was Prince Charles. So
interesting.
Yeah,
that I didn't know.
They're buddies. They're close. That's what happens in the king world, I guess.
And here's the thing. This is I'm going to have relatively few opinions here, because they have the one thing I think we've learned in the geopolitical game is that empire dies hard. Right. If you look at, for example, the role of like Macau and Angola, that kind of popped up. Yet Isabel dos Santos was, tied in with Israeli diamonds and Swiss banks and all this stuff. Richest woman in Africa. Angola is part of the old Portuguese Empire. Macau was given over to China in 1997, and it had, up until that point, it had been part of the Portuguese Empire. And it turns out that it's this funnel for cash from and to North Korea. It's North Korea's forward operating base. That's pretty interesting, right?
It is interesting.
And Macau's original position was across from Nagasaki, and so Portuguese, they made trade possible between the Chinese and the Japanese, who hated each other, but still wanted to remain trading partners. So, this stuff is all really old, really complicated. Hong Kong, of course, is, still got British roots in there. And, the royals here of any imperial family or system, are going to be important. But these are people of real influence. And what are they doing for or against national security? And what is their real role and real effect? There's so much shrouded in mystery there.
Yeah, it really is interesting. The Queen, by the way, I think last time you brought up the Santos, I couldn't remember the Diamond King's name. Lev Leviev is the name of the
Yes.
Israeli Diamond King who has interests in diamond mining in Angola. Who's also been up for all sorts of criminal charges, including murder for other things. But this happens. Also very close, should I mention, to Donald Trump and the Trump family because. They seem to all run in the same circles. It's all enough to make you scream, right? Look at little Louis over here. This is the future, potentially a future king. That's Prince Louis. On his left is Charlotte, and then King George, who will be king one day. Which is a job maybe no one really wants. I wouldn't want that job. But right now the problem is we've got Prince Charles who will be the king, and he's a bit of a challenge. He's not, as you and I might think certain ways about things. He thinks very differently about the world, and he wants to rearrange the world economy in a new, sustainable economy. And he's calling it the Great Reset. You've heard it before. Some people are calling it the Great Change. It's basically his desire to change the way the world economy runs. It may be the reason we've been going through all the things we've been going through in the recent past. And the guy's 73. He's a bit grumpy. He's also got a challenging history in that he, how should I put this, was friends with this guy, Jimmy Summer. What's this guy? What's his last name? Jimmy.
Oh, Jimmy Savile.
Savile, yes.
Oh.
Known for his child raping.
One of the great monsters of the 20th century.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. So they're really good friends, or were at least. And not only that, he's got an interesting history of doing this a few times. He was also apparently there's a big scandal in the Anglican Church involving child abuse, and Prince Charles helped cover that up as well. So.
That's interesting because I think the Archbishop of Canterbury, was it, or was one of the Anglican Church officials came out and tried to explain how, we all need to be tolerant, and Prince Andrew wants to move on, and we should be all cool with that. And I thought, no, but that's me.
Yeah, that's why Prince Andrew wasn't appearing today. Well, apparently he has COVID, but he also wasn't appearing in the balcony because he no longer has any official duties. Because, as we all know, this is Prince Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell from way back when, as they were dating. They've been friends since they were kids. Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, of Jeffrey Epstein notoriety, and we all know where that landed up going with human trafficking and arms trafficking, which is what Prince Andrew did on behalf of the Queen. He was amongst other things, a well-known arms trafficker.
He had Gaddafi's kid at his daughter's wedding, right?
I think so, something like that. Yeah, he's if you want a good arms deal, Andrew'd be a good guy to hook you up. He'd be the dude. If you're in that business.
Better than me.
Yeah, so I don't know anything about arms dealing, but there you go. This Prince Charles, he was very, very nice to his mom, who's ailing 96, because there's a possibility, that she does skip over him, and he really doesn't want that. So he's desperately being very, very nice to her about absolutely everything today on the balcony over there, and he's just determined to ascend. She's so worried about him, by the way, that she's actually made Camilla Parker Bowles the queen consort, which means she actually could ascend to be queen one day.
Really?
Yeah, because she's the only sane person who could actually manage the future king.
So she's elevated Camilla Parker Bowles.
Yes.
To
basically
that's interesting. Equal. That is something I did not know.
Yeah, there you go.
That's good.
Little information.
We do news on narrative.
It's really important that someone actually be there to check him, because he's got some really unusual instincts, I guess. Anyhow, she's not like her mother. Her mother stepped down earlier on to let her become queen, but she's 96 and she's not going anywhere. She's not. He's ready to take the throne, and she's not handing it over any earlier than she needs to. That's interesting too.
That's interesting.
Yeah. On the other side of the picture, there's William, who pretends not to give a shit about when he'll be king, but who wouldn't care? If that was your future, are you going to be like the kid of the king for the next 40 years until that guy dies, or are you going to be the king right now? You'd care. I'd care. So he cares. Well, he pretends that he's Switzerland on the topic. His wife, Catherine, very, 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 very popular. People love this woman, and rightly so. She's doing, as far as the monarchy goes, she does a decent job.
Her hat game is fierce.
Yeah, that is good.
That's a stylish hat.
Yeah. The Queen looks pretty good. I mean, considering the fact that this was all she could do today, she won't do anything left in the Jubilee. She's basically, I think she's attending maybe the concert, but she's unable to really leave the Buckingham Palace. She's very ill.
She's 96.
96. So it's going to be soon. They will be saying King Charles, and he'll be there on the throne. Don't they make they look happy?
I'm American. I really don't see the point of monarchies, and we haven't where I'm from for 250 plus years. So,
but you should still care about the monarchy, because my point is the monarchy is a very global thing, and it has influence in many, many different countries and many, many different interests, including the United States. There's a lot of royalty in the United States. It holds a lot of wealth, the royalty in the United States, whether it comes from Great Britain or other countries. And that's really the interesting thing about this particular family, is they're not necessarily British. I mean, as far as we all know, they sort of come from German or Prussian origin, but they're also all interconnected, are all royal things, with the other countries' royal families, including the Russians. I didn't know this until recently. And
yes.
Yeah, so it turns out that, this is according to their Bible, Prince Harry, but it's not really Prince Harry, it's all of them, are related to the Romanovs through the Queen's ex or former, or the late husband, Prince Philip. And it'll give you a full explanation over here. In fact, this is interesting that when the two children thought to be Maria and Alexei Romanov were found in a field in 2007, the remains of them, it was Prince Philip's DNA that was used to identify them, which is interesting. I didn't know that. That's how close the DNA is. So that means everyone who falls under Prince Philip, which is everybody from Prince Charles downwards, they're all sort of in with the Russians as well. They're in with the Russian Romanovs. And you might say, well, surely the Romanovs are no longer in Russia, but you're wrong. The Romanovs have just recently returned to Russia, where they are now running a new sort of monarchy, a new eager monarchy wanting to take over the entire country, which is interesting considering we're at war with them. It's interesting that's what's going on in the background of Russia. So that's all interesting. Just interesting stuff for people to think about as the next few days of rah-rah go on American television and everywhere else about how wonderful this Jubilee is. And don't Prince William and Prince Harry look like they're getting along well with each other? And isn't that sweet that the kids are playing with each other? Yes, it's true, but there's all sorts of geopolitical implications to what's going on. And the biggest shift in global economic policy in 70 years being proposed by a guy that some people have real questions about, who's about to take over the throne in one of the biggest empires of the world. Should be a concern to people covering the story beyond the pageantry and the wonderful, gossip column fodder that they provide. There's a lot in there that's of value.
Now, what are the reforms in particular that are being suggested?
His idea is that, it's all, God bless him, this idea is wonderful. We have sustainable local economies that you only really live off what you can produce in your local environment. So he built this little village based on how he thought the world would be. So it'd be like you're going to what looks like an old market, but inside would be a very modern, sophisticated place, but everything would look like an old school village. I mean, basically it was his concept village. Sustainability is a very important and laudable thing, and everyone loves the idea. But if we're just going to sort of yank the chain of all our economies and suddenly switch from being globalists to being sustainable, it's going to cause enormous disruptions. I mean, it's a stunningly complicated thing to pull off, and you need things like war and pandemics and famine and all sorts of other things to get you there, because otherwise, how do you reset economies? They don't just reset themselves, you got to reset them. So, that to me has always been a big question mark around, why he believes the Great Reset is such a big deal. But I'm probably not doing it justice. There's a lot of economic thinking around why this is the better way to go, that you only use the resources you have to produce what you need. It makes sense. Can we pull it off? I have no idea. I'm not an economist, but that's maybe for another day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure Britain is going, or its royals or anybody else are going to lead the world economy. America is. So yes. I'm interested in hearing Chuck's ideas.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if the economy is going to be if the American economy is going to be as powerful after all these attacks that we've been having in the last few years, that there's so much, multilateral attacks going on our economy and our political standing and our alliances and all that kind of stuff.
So if Chuck becomes king there, does he get the bank accounts in Jersey? And have they peeled off all the Russian sanctioned money out of Jersey yet?
He already has. He has his own little county there, I guess, which is his own personal bank account that he can just basically taxes the locals 10% or something every year, and he goes directly to him. So he already has that because he's a prince. But he's going to have more. He's going to now have
land and title.
Yeah,
land and
Jersey
title.
and a bunch of other places, and he can do what he wants to with these places. He can determine who lives in which houses. He can determine how they live. He can determine how much money he wants from them. It's really. For people who think that the idea of dictatorship and autocracy is going to be better than democracy, this is what it looks like. It's absolute corruption at its worst, where some dude, because he was born to some other dude, gets to decide where you live, how you live, and take a portion of your money just because he wants to, just because why not?
Again, I'm American. I thought we got over that. I thought we all decided that was a terrible idea. But
that's why America started, right? That's the whole idea behind America. It's the greatest country in the world because they threw out the royals and they just established a democracy. And now one half of the country, the one party in that country, wants to return us back to the thing that we revolted against.
I think the notion of authoritarianism is deep in the human mindset. It's part of our makeup. When we're children, we are vulnerable and we need saving. We don't have the ability to make decisions for ourselves. We would starve to death. We would probably, walk out into traffic and kill ourselves. We all start needing good authority figures. And of course, you're the better authority figure you have, right? Nice parents and thoughtful parents and good parents, the happier you tend to be. And the more abusive and terrible those parents are, you tend to be less happy and successful throughout life. There are exceptions, but that's the thing. And as long as there is something innate in the human being, we all come into this world naked and totally vulnerable, and we need somebody else to make decisions for us. There's always going to be a part of our psyche that wants somebody to take over when we're scared. And with look back on 9/11 and how popular George W. Bush wasn't prior to 9/11. And I was in DC working think tanks, doing intel stuff, and we kind of thought George W. Bush talked like he learned English from Rosetta Stone or something. And he was, the administration was kind of a joke. And, after those planes hit, we were all like, all right, man, well, I'm rooting for you. Do the good speech. And he did. He stepped up. It's not to say the administration, that was a long two administrations right there.
That was a very bad administration, I'm going to say. He stepped
up.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, no, but I'll tell you. I won't speak for everyone. Yeah. I've talked to other people who've said this before, but I was like, "Come on, man, I'm rooting for you. Do it," because we needed a leader.
Yeah.
And there's all, and again, I was not predisposed to like him at the time, but so when we're scared, we want someone to be in charge. Because things are out of control and the world is a big complex place, and even very influential people don't know how it's going to turn out. As long as we have that, we're going to have a tendency towards autocracy in some way. And I think the whole point of culture and government and how we run society is trying to educate our people to know that there's a tendency towards that, but that overall we all do better when we share power, when we have rule of law, when we have peaceful transfer of power, and that we are not going to be saved by a warlord.
I love what you're saying, because the truth of it is, the reason we have so much fear pumped into our system, and I do believe it's artificially pumped into our system, is in order to create an environment where dictators can rise. The minute you take away, you limit supplies of anything, whether it's baby formula or oil or air, you name it. They are, the minute that supplies get limited, people start looking after their own quite quickly. They get worried about, well, am I going to be able to do this next month or next year? So I'm going to protect my family first, and then maybe my community, and so you create this fear, and you create these enemies on these, on the outside that are coming to get you, whether it's the Muslims or the blacks or you name it, they will find a way of saying to you, be scared of this looming thing that's coming for you. And that fear in itself will drive you to protect yourself and your communities. And that itself will lead you to kind of a dictatorship, which I think is sort of where we are. We're sort of seeing that anthropologically, at least. That's what it feels like we're going through right now.
Kind of leads us into Facebook there, doesn't it? Because that was like the world's largest psychological experiment where no one gave their consent except to, I get if I give you my pictures of me with a mullet in 1988, yes, that'll be up publicly. But I don't think anybody understood that there was going to be research done on our moods based on their news feed. And I don't think any of us knew that there were going to be hostile foreign intelligence services climbing right in through Facebook, almost as part of its design to mess with people's minds, split up electorates, get neighbors hating each other, get family members fighting, and studying it and refining it. I mean,
it's a mind fuck machine, to use a term that I think Steve Bannon came up with. But, it was a mind fuck machine, and it fucked everybody. It basically distorted our thinking for many, many years. I did a bunch of articles back in 2017. You can find them on the narrative.org blog, which basically explained how all of this may have happened. A lot of this based on extrapolating from the facts of the time. And some looked at the way they were seeding messages into the economy, especially those fear-based messages. Others looked at how Vladimir Putin was behind using Facebook as a way to organize groups and Black Lives Matter groups, all those kinds of groups. Then we looked at the psychological warfare, the actual Cambridge Analytica piece of this that was sitting there at their social media headquarters, not only targeting messages to people, but fundraising $96 million or something for that campaign. All came out of Facebook. People forget that Facebook was a big fundraiser. Then we found out that, hey.
And that was for what? That was
for the Trump campaign. The Trump campaign. Most of the fundraising.
How much money was it?
$96 million. All of it, which I think actually I detail in a later story, came out of Saudi Arabia and a bunch of other places in micropayments. But I digress. That's going to take a full show. And then we found out that, hey, a little dirty little secret of Zuckerberg is his connection to Yuri Milner, how he got that funding without, Russia gave him this enormous check, but never asked for a seat on the board, which is not what people do.
They didn't need one.
Yeah. And so he became, Russia basically became a enormous investor in Facebook. And so, it's not surprising then that these are four people, well, maybe surprising to you, but it won't be surprising by the time we finish the segment, that these four people were the longest connected people to Facebook that we know of. Now, Peter Thiel. Of course, we know Peter Thiel. He's the funder of Facebook, but also the founder of Founders Fund. This is one of his funds. He does Palantir. He does a lot of other things. But originally from the PayPal Mafia, which we've discussed quite a lot on the show. German roots, but certainly spent some time in Southwest Africa. Today, that's called Namibia, and that's in the mining industry there, so very tied to the South African mafia, if you'd like that. Then there's Sheryl Sandberg, who until yesterday was the chief operating officer. I'm sure she still is. She hasn't quite given up her reins yet, but she announced her intention to resign because she wants to look at philanthropic interests that she has. Apparently wants to focus on her foundation, ladies and gentlemen. Lean into that foundation. Mark Zuckerberg is the supposedly brilliant person who came up with Facebook back in Harvard, and Larry Summers is the former Secretary of the Treasury.
The Treasury, yes.
Yeah, and a former
And
Harvard.
Sheryl Sandberg used to be his chief of staff, and I heard that they had more of an intimate relationship than that, but I don't really care.
It's quite possible. Yeah, it's quite possible that they had more than, he was her mentor when she was at Harvard, and that's when she published her dissertation or whatever it was that she did there. It was under his tutelage, so he was the guy who spent a lot of time with her, helping her through those, coming up with that, and they became very close. I mean, it's no secret the two of them were quite close. They not only did she finish her MBA under him, Summers was then appointed as Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary, and also spent some time in
Oh.
D.C. before that. And she followed him there. She did not follow her own other interests. She decided to go along with him to the Treasury Secretary, where she became his chief of staff in 1999.
Now, that's an interesting time period because that's when you had the Commodities Modernization Act, where you have derivatives, where this Summers guy convinces Bill Clinton, oh, no, that doesn't, it seems like it's insurance on other financial bets, like a casino sitting on a casino. And if you have insurance for things, you have to have capital controls
Right,
for it. Like,
right.
your insurance company is regulated by the state. In every state, we have 50 different insurance commissions, and they go and check up on you to make sure that if bad things happen, that you will get paid out because they have capital. And they have these things called derivatives, like credit default swaps and that kind of thing, that ended up blowing up the U.S. economy in 2008. And Summers, and apparently, his chief of staff there was Sheryl Sandberg. I did not know that she was there in that period of time where they convinced Clinton to not regulate derivatives. And they also got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act, which had guided the American economy outside, helping tame the worst impulses of capitalism while keeping the most stability, so the most entrepreneurs can flourish without it going into like crazy casino land, which is what happened in the 1920s, of course, the crash of 29.
And in 2008, just a few years after that, when he was he was the Secretary of the Treasury, they had that crash that led into 2008, and when Obama had to take over, just at that exact moment, everything crashed because not necessarily Sandberg directly, but under Summers, and she was his chief of staff, they eliminated a lot of these policies that were helping protect the American economy. Which when they were taken away, were obviously taken advantage of, and then boom, we had the crash in 2008, leading into 2009. Yeah. Not great for Barack Obama, but he was a great leader and was able to get himself out of that. So, and the story you would think, well, that's an amazing story right there. We could just stop right there. That's the origin story of Sheryl Sandberg would be enough to say it's a big headline right there. But of course, what happens next is even bigger because I think it's in around 2003. So there is this little Epstein scandal that starts popping up, and that Larry Summers is somehow connected to that, I think. Maybe he's not connected to that yet, but at least he leaves the White House and takes up a position as the president of Harvard. And now the Epstein stuff is going on in the background, and we know that Larry Summers and Epstein would land up having sort of an interesting financial relationship as it was related to lots of donations to Harvard, which is something just to keep in the back of your mind when you think about his allegiances to people. Because
interesting. All right.
Yeah. So, but guess what? We still haven't had Facebook yet. Facebook hasn't even really started yet. Facebook only pops up in Larry Summers' world in, I think, 2004. So he's now
very early.
Yeah. He's the president of Harvard. He's finished already. He's done the Secretary of the Treasury for Bill Clinton. Sheryl Sandberg, is she still with him at Harvard? I don't know if she goes back to him at Harvard, but there he is in 2004, and he has to adjudicate about whether it's the Winklevoss brothers or Mark Zuckerberg, if you remember the movie, who get to have the concept of Facebook, because he's the guy who actually makes that determination, because it's his university. Yeah.
How did he get to make that determination?
Because it was happening under his campus, So he's influencing the process. I don't know if he made the actual final determination, but
it went before a judge, right?
Much later. It went before a judge. But I think back then it was just sort of, you can pursue it or whatever. I don't remember the exact movie, but someone has to correct me and maybe watch it and we can review that in great detail. But so he's intimately then involved in knowledge of all this Facebook stuff, right? It's kind of like, oh yeah, I know this Facebook concept, and I, might know somebody who could be the COO of that company, because I used to tutelage her during her MBA, and she was my chief of staff, and yada yada. So the official story.
Way back in the day, though, that was literally just, a way to assemble the identity of hot chicks around campus. So it would be weird to have a man of such influence fiddling around with that unless Facebook's origin story isn't maybe what we've been told.
Well, there was a big fight, right? According to the Winklevoss brothers, Mark Zuckerberg stole the concept from them and then started his own. He was working for them as a program, and then he stole the concept and then developed it on his own. Seems like that's the story, but was it a theft, or was it just I was doing my work on the side? Who knows? Who knows what that is? But it does make you wonder about Summers, who was quite an influential guy, even as the Treasury Secretary, then also having an opinion on which one of those two parties should take Facebook. The official story that they tell the world is that Sheryl Sandberg met Mark Zuckerberg at a cocktail party somewhere. I think it was in D.C. Maybe it was at Summers' place. Who knows? But they had a cocktail party much, much later. We're talking about, whenever she joined she was there for 8 years, I think. So I'm not sure. Maybe longer. But yeah, the official story has to do with them having a cocktail party introduction, and he loved her so much, couldn't resist hiring her, and then boom, she became the COO. It strikes me as being a little inauthentic, considering all the way back to 1995, she knew Summers and was probably aware of all sorts of things related to Facebook all the way through, considering some people say she may have had some sort of intimate relationship with her, or certainly close relationship beyond.
But if that's a time period when, they both knew Jeffrey Epstein, maybe?
Well, Jeffrey Epstein thing, yes, after it came in the 2000s. So that's when that sort of broke, yeah. So
yeah, but he was floating around in the 90s, certainly.
That's true.
And,
that's true.
And well, look, Larry
He knew
Summers
Clinton.
was in the White House. Jeffrey Epstein visited the White House like 17 times, I believe, officially.
Right.
It sounds like, he might have maybe met. Didn't we kind of decide that Jeffrey Epstein was an Israeli intelligence?
I am alone in the world to say this out publicly all the time, but he's definitely an Israeli asset, and so is Ghislaine Maxwell. Also did work, I believe.
Robert Maxwell, who died in weird circumstances in '91, is buried in Israel, right?
Yeah, and clearly was, look, Robert Maxwell worked for a lot of people. He worked for the KGB, he worked for the MI6. He was sort of ties back to our earlier story. He worked for the Queen on a bunch of things. As Andrew, we mentioned already, worked for Epstein. So there's a whole connectivity there. There's a lot going on in that connection as well. So it's not surprising that Larry Summers might have known Epstein. He probably did in that early stage, because ultimately Epstein was there to basically keep Clinton in line. He was designed to keep Clinton in line, and that's why he was sent to the United States to sort of to basically monitor the Clintons.
Epstein was, or Summers was?
Epstein was. It was Ari Ben-Menashe told me that Epstein was his main role was to ensure that Clinton wouldn't be too far left, especially in Middle East policy related to the Palestinians.
Oh,
yeah.
So there was like an Israeli concern about making sure Bill Clinton was under certain type of control.
Yeah, cut to the blue dress.
And
cut to Monica
who
Lewinsky,
told you that again?
Ari Ben-Menashe, former chief executive, it's a senior executive at the Israeli military intelligence regulatory thing. It's called OMAD, but it's kind of complicated. So he was just a senior spy. He was also Robert Maxwell's handler during the Iran-Contra affair.
Oh. And you met him in person, didn't you?
Yeah, I met him all the way in Montreal. Very interesting guy. Certainly very frank about his view of the world. And he was the one who told me that Epstein worked for the Israelis. He also told me that Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell met way back in the 80s and not in the 90s, as other people have reported, and that they met while he was doing the Iran-Contra affair. So all I can say is that's what he said. That's what he told me. So that all ties into the same period of time. Then, if you follow that on to, well, let's go to the Clinton administration, when Epstein comes, when Robert Maxwell dies, and then Ghislaine Maxwell moves to the United States into the arms of her new lover, Jeffrey Epstein, even though he wasn't really a new lover. They become a partnership and they start corrupting American politicians, including Bill Clinton. At least that's the theory. We don't know for sure that that's what happened, but that's the theory.
We know that the trafficking, the dates of her prosecution, the dates of the offending acts start in 1994.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So prime Clinton years.
Yeah. So Summers would have been there at that time. Guess who else would have been there? Probably Sheryl Sandberg might have been around at the time.
Oh.
Yeah. Because she was there. She was the chief of staff. She was the chief of staff of the Treasury Secretary at the time.
Now, doesn't she have some pretty heavy, like, Israeli intelligence ties of her own?
Well, she has family ties, and this is, I wish I had the full details here. I was trying to get all before the show, and I might have to do this part 2 of this tomorrow night, but she has family ties to her father and her mother came out of, they lived in Florida, and I think that they were supporters or friends with Natan Sharansky. And Natan Sharansky, if I remember correctly, is a famous Russian dissident who basically stood up against the Soviets and was one of the initial people who came to the United States under the Refusenik movement. But there's much more than that, even, which I'm
we
not
already
gonna
mentioned the
report
Refuseniks.
Yeah. The
Refuseniks is when we had a substantial population emigrate from Russia to 3 countries: Israel, the United States, particularly Brighton Beach, and Canada. And when they got to Brighton Beach, a lot of those guys ended up rolling the Cosa Nostra. And wasn't that program in Israel under Menachem Begin, who was Likud prior to
not only that. You want to know what's more interesting? Well, not more interesting, and even as interesting is
there anything more interesting than what we just laid out?
That Robert Maxwell was the guy who basically convinced everybody to do the Refusenik thing. He was like the big champion of the Refusenik thing. He was close to Gorbachev. He was the reason that all took place. And there was another Israeli cell inside the Reagan White House that helped make that happen.
And there's a lot of overlapping between the Reagan White House and the Trump White House, but not the George H.W. Bush 41 White House.
Well,
Wikipedia.
Check
it out. They're very different. Reagan and Bush 41 were very different. But you see a lot of people that were in the Reagan sphere who, they end up in the Bush 43 sphere, and they end up in the Trump sphere. That's very interesting.
And Nixon. Some of them has landed up at Nixon. Famous back
Some of this stuff starts with Nixon. That's right.
So that's part of the Sheryl Sandberg backstory. I'd not intended to go into all these side panels, but they were interesting. Eric, you got a smart little mind there. You're connecting all the dots here. Tomorrow night, I'm going to see if I can get the actual cliffhanger, shocker thing that we found out, and I'm just going to confirm it before I put it on the air, which will make you go, wow, we were snookered by Facebook. What a con that thing was. So goodbye, Sheryl Sandberg. We won't miss you because we'd like our privacy back, and we'd like our, you and everybody else who ends up owning these companies to stop mind-fucking us in future elections. And maybe foreigners could stop using it to sort of invade our privacy and control our country. That would be a nice thing to do, please.
I'd like it.
Yeah, why not? That's the show for tonight. Eric, tell people about what they can need to know from you in terms of game theory and also anything else you want to share.
The only thing they need to know is if you're in St. Louis and you're a very influential, wealthy person, or you're in an elected official or in law and order or whatever, you need to dive for the FBI field office tonight because it'll probably be too late by tomorrow afternoon. I don't really care what you do, though. That's it. That's my message.
Oh, so pleasant. And of course, we got to remind you that we're very thankful to our patrons. Without you, we can't make this programming. Without you, all these stories we keep telling you about would never come to light. That's the only reason you're getting to hear about them is because you're funding our programming. So please go to patreon.com/narrative and keep subscribing and supporting us because it really makes the difference. On that note, we'll see you tomorrow night with Rachel Bitterkoffer on the after show. Have a good night, everybody. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.